Victor Jara is probably one of the most beloved musicians in Chilean history. His music was widely known throughout the nation and was one of the renowned voices of La Nueva Cancion, or the New Song movement. According to Murray Luft, this genre of music was characterized as political, anti-establishment, and advocated for liberation, social justice, and cultural pride. This generation was inspired by the 1959 Cuban Revolution and global resistance to capitalism and US imperialism in Vietnam and in Latin America. La Nueva Cancion gained significant popularity among Chilean youths, especially those who were affiliated with socialist, communist, and other leftist political organizations in the 1950s and 60s. This genre's artists included groups such as Inti Ilmani, Quilapayún, Angel Parra, and Isabel Parra. Perhaps one of the most well-recognized songs of the New Song movement today is Violeta Parra's Gracias a la Vida, or Thank You to Life, which was written right before she tragically took her own life.
Gracias a la vida que me ha dado tanto.
This song was famously covered by Isabel Parra, later by Mercedes Sosa, and Yottobeatz. I mean, even the song has gotten electronic music remixes. Victor Jara was not only a singer, but also a teacher, a political activist, and a staunch supporter of the newly elected socialist president, Salvador Allende. 3 years into the Allende presidency, Victor found himself inside Estadio Chile, but he wasn't there to play any sports or to perform. Just moments before arriving at the stadium, Jara was among the thousands of political prisoners who were kidnapped and arrested by the US-backed Chilean military dictatorship that overthrew President Allende on September 11th, 1973. This coup was part of the United States' efforts during the Cold War to eliminate anything they believed could lead to communist influence in Latin America. Together, the US and Chilean military planned and carried out the successful coup that deposed President Allende. The conservative military government of Augusto Pinochet disappeared, tortured, and murdered anyone who was affiliated with leftist organizations. The dictatorship also targeted anyone who sympathized with the now deposed President Allende, who allegedly died by suicide on the day of the military coup. The Chilean military dictatorship lasted from 1973 to 1990 and was responsible for the kidnappings and disappearances of at least 3,000 people, most of whom were considered political opponents. According to Amnesty International, 3,216 people were killed or disappeared by the Chilean dictatorship. Approximately 40,000 people are believed to have suffered human rights abuses, including political imprisonment and torture. The Chilean military sought to purge anything and anyone affiliated with the left. Among the thousands of prisoners in the stadium were members of Allende's political party, Popular Unity. The disappeared also included socialists, communists. Victor Jara himself identified as a communist. Some moderate leftists who initially supported the dictatorship were also among the disappeared. Chilean artists who were part of the New Song movement were direct targets of the military, forcing many musicians to go into exile during the dictatorship. On the same day of the Chilean military coup, supporters of President Allende, including Victor Jara, occupied the Chilean Technical University, where Jara worked and taught. These protesters were arrested and subsequently taken at gunpoint to Estadio Chile, which essentially became a concentration camp for leftists who opposed the military regime. Due to his celebrity status as a singer and activist, it did not take long for the army officers to recognize Jara as a prisoner in the stadium. He was targeted, singled out, and made an example of in front of the others jailed at the stadium. Victor was beaten and interrogated multiple times. Army officers stepped on his wrists and mutilated his lips. As he was tortured, it is said he sang the song Venceremos, We Will Win, as an act of defiance. According to Robert Neustadt, Venceremos was the song composed by Sergio Ortega and served as a rally anthem for Salvador Allende's Popular Unity Party. It called for unity among the workers, farmers, and students. After many days of torture, the Chilean military ordered Victor Jara's execution. he was shot in the head, and to add insult to injury, Jara's body was littered with at least 40 machine gun bullets. After he was executed, the military left his body displayed in front of the stadium to terrorize the other prisoners. Eventually, his body was left out in the streets outside of the stadium, alongside the bodies of other prisoners who were executed. Victor Jara, the renowned voice of the Chilean New Song movement, became a martyr for the Chilean left. We will return to Victor Jara's lasting impact on the Chilean Nueva Cancion. Jara's music also inspired others living in Latin American nations who fell to right-wing military dictatorships, including Argentina, El Salvador, Brazil, Guatemala, Uruguay, and Ecuador. These nations also had their own networks in place that disappeared, tortured, and assassinated leftists and opponents of the dictatorships. For example, there was the infamous Operation Condor in South America.
The date, November 25th, 1975. High-ranking officials from several South American countries gathered in Santiago with a dark agenda. They launched Operation Condor. Military dictatorships from half a dozen countries began swapping information to hunt down political opponents.
In the previous video, we explored how popular culture also incorporated social commentary and political satire. In the case of the Chilean Nueva Cancion, we see how popular culture intersected with popular protest movements in the late 20th century. In this video, we will cover the significance of music and protest as a theme in Latin American popular culture. We examine the work of Robert Neustadt, which explores protest music in Chile and Argentina. Next, we will examine Paulina Alberto's work on soul music and the Black Power movement in Brazil. Lastly, Arlene B. Tickner's article examines the impact of hip-hop in Colombia, Cuba, and Mexico. For those on YouTube, I have included the citations for these works in both the video description and here as well.
So just as a side note, when I ended up editing and recording this video, it ended up being a lot longer than I initially wanted it to be. So I decided to split this video up into 2 parts. This will just be the first part. Make sure to check out part 2 where I cover hip-hop.
Now, let's get to it. Nueva Cancion, or the New Song movement in Chile, eventually evolved into a pan-Latin American phenomena viewed as a call for social justice from the left. It was also a movement that celebrated Chile's indigenous heritage. It was this subversive message that led the Chilean military to declare a war on music.
Just a disclaimer, if you're looking for internet content on the Chilean dictatorship, just a disclaimer that there are some very gruesome images on the internet, and not only that, there's a lot of very extreme right-wing propaganda out there that's essentially on the Chilean dictatorship's infamous throwing of people outside of helicopters. There are folks that are praising Pinochet and the Chilean dictatorship for committing these acts of violence. So there's some really disgusting ones but just that's a disclaimer. There's a lot of folks who are celebrating this state violence on the internet today, unfortunately.
The violence of the military regime left many Chilean artists like Inti Illimani and Quilapayún in exile during the dictatorship. And perhaps due to the violence of the military regime, Chilean music became less politically explicit. In the 1980s, artists like Los Prisioneros alluded to social problems and political change in Chile without directly pointing the finger at their government, because again, doing so could lead to your disappearance, torture, and worse, execution. So I don't blame them. Now, as a side note, if you're into rock en español, the name Los Prisioneros should sound familiar to you because they are the authors of the song Train to the South. Their song La Voz de los 80, or The Voice of the 80s, celebrated big changes underway in Chile, encouraging youth to embrace this new movement without explicitly mentioning political calls for a return to democracy, because again, doing so could get you killed. Los Prisioneros sang about unemployment, pollution, and alienated youths, which ran contrary to the Chilean dictatorship's claim that all was well and in order in their country. As best stated by Neustadt, Los Prisioneros reoccupied the void that was left behind by the disappearance of Nueva Cancion and Canto Nuevo. The rhythms and sound would also contribute to a political campaign known as the No Movement. This is when Chileans eventually voted to oust the military dictatorship and returned to democracy. During the 1970s, music was also feared by the Brazilian dictatorship as something that could be potentially subversive. According to Paulina Alberto, the secret police, the DGIE, were intimidated by Brazilian DJs in Rio de Janeiro who played soul music from the United States. The secret police feared that leftist subversives used the soul music scene to plot a revolt against the Brazilian dictatorship. The Brazilian military became interested in soul music as a threat because of an article published by a journalist named Lena Frias. The military interpreted Frias's article as evidence that soul music was a potentially subversive subculture, evidence of foreign intrusion, leftist politics, and black radicalism from the United States. Frias's article sparked conservative anxieties of what she referred to as Black Rio. Her article highlighted how Brazilians who were part of racial justice movements began to adopt the term black over Brazilian terms such as pardo, preto, or negro. Also, those who were part of Brazil's Black Power movement pointed out how Brazilians of color suffered from various forms of racial discrimination and were often prohibited from entering music venues that were often restricted to whites only. So many Black Brazilians attended soul music venues as an alternative. Despite organic concerns of racial discrimination at home, the military associated soul music with anti-white hostility and the US's Black Power movement. In 1975, the military interrogated members of Brazil's Black Power movement, but ultimately they did not find any credible links between activists and soul music events. Interestingly, we learned that Frias herself was not a conservative sympathizer who sought to warn the Brazilian dictatorship about the dangers of soul music. Instead, we learned that Frias was actually a woman of color and a leftist for that matter. In her article, she critiqued soul music as being incompatible with Brazil's racial politics. She dismissed soul music as a capitalist consumer culture product from the United States and claimed that people who listened to soul music tended to be wealthy and white Brazilians. Frias argued that soul music was a distraction from left-wing revolutionary activities and that progressive Brazilians should turn their attention to samba music, which she felt was more compatible with Brazilian culture. However, both critics on the left and right made unfounded claims about soul music in Brazil. Alberto notes that Brazilians of color were actually the ones who attended and organized soul music events, as opposed to samba music events that tended to benefit wealthy white Brazilian elites. Although the military regime feared that soul music had the potential to incite rebellion because it led to the congregation of large numbers of Black Brazilians, most attendees just came to dance, not to engage in political organizing. Granted, some anti-racist activists did attend soul music dances, but they did not use these events to engage in political mobilization, at least not explicitly. Some activists viewed soul music as a means to promote the Black Power movement in Brazil, or at least felt that it was a method of raising Black consciousness. Regardless, soul music was viewed as a means of Black cultural expression, although to a lesser extent, it also served as a form of political expression. For that matter, the soul music scene in Brazil carved out a space of belonging for Brazilians of color who tended to be excluded from white-only dance clubs. Thank you again for checking into the lecture, and make sure to check out part 2 where we discuss hip-hop. Thank you.